T, I most certainly appreciate that. I want to thank AAC&U for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful gathering. I'm just excited. This is going to be an exciting time. Let me just share with you a story, because that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to talk about a story. I really believe in the whole concept and the whole notion of narrative. We really need to understand what a narrative is, and we need to bring narrative into the spaces of our communication when we're talking about diversity and inclusion. We need to take the data and make the data into narrative, and we need to take the narrative and make the narrative into data. And so as we go through this process, I'm not going to necessarily share with you tips. I'm going to share with you a story that I wrote after the planning committee met last November for this conference. I was so on fire with the direction of the planning committee and the information that was coming forward that I went home and I began to pen this narrative. And this narrative takes us through connected spaces of several individuals on a college campus on one particular day. So as you listen to me read one class and rushing to the next, or grabbing a quick bite to eat before starting, hear the different experiences from different people about how they're experiencing the college campus on this one particular day, I would like for you to focus in on a couple of things. I would like for you to think about your college campus. Think about how you are creating narrative on your college campus. Think about who's creating that narrative, who's a part of that narrative. The campus, how that narrative, the swarms of students crafted. Is that narrative connected to the larger university mission? Some of the questions that I just threw out there are on your table right now. After I speak and share with you the narrative, then you will have an opportunity to engage in the questions at your table and talk with each other and share some of your best practices. So just bear with me for a moment. There's a songwriter named Erykah Badu. Not sure if some of you may be familiar with her. She stated one time, she said, "I'm an artist, and I'm sensitive about my Well, I'm not an artist, but I'm still sensitive about my So y'all be kind. On a warm, breezy, sunny day in September, Tom Brown takes a leisurely walk across the campus on his way to visit his brother, Professor Jerry Brown, chair of the chemistry department. This is Tom's first visit to the university. He has heard Jerry speak very fondly of the campus, but really did not have a context from which to form his own opinion. Therefore, Jerry invited Tom to visit with him and attend one of his Thursday afternoon department meetings. As he walked across the expansive green space, affectionately known as the quad, Tom noticed students are everywhere, engaged in all sorts of activities. In the far-off distance, he catches a soccer game in progress, while a few yards away, he noticed a group of students breakdancing. The scene brought fond memories back to Tom's youth. As a teen, he and his brother Jerry, they were part of a hip-hop crew. They weren't that good. Becky Thompson, that although the university, Becky for short, will have to absorb, is the first in her family to attend college. Her parents divorced when she and her younger brother were toddlers. Although she did not have a college degree, her mother did well for herself in the real estate industry. Her father struggled with drug addiction and was mostly absent from his children's lives. This was Becky's first time away from her home in Queens, New York, for any extended period of time. This realization became high-definition clear when she walked somewhat absent-mindedly on the quad. Although the sun was shining and the September breeze was very familiar and comfortable to her, she felt gloomy. Her heart was heavy as she longed to be home with her mother and her younger brother. The campus was humming with swarms of students leaving one class and rushing to the next, or grabbing a quick bite to eat before starting their weekend. It appears Thursdays are the new Fridays on college campus these days. Becky had been so consumed with her homesickness that she forgot that this particular Thursday was Preview Day. Preview Day offers all of the student organizations to showcase their purpose, mission, and activities. Every corner of the quad was covered with table tents, beanbag stations, and food stations. The atmosphere was festive with the smell of grilled hot dogs in the air and the lyrics from Iggy Azalea's Fancy booming in the open space. This explains in part the swarm of students. Although she hadn't planned on visiting with any particular student group, Becky felt compelled to wander around the quad and see what was offered. Becky was amazed by the many student organizations were on campus. There was everything from fraternities and sororities to skateboarder clubs to geeks around the world to the LGBTQ Center. A student handed Becky a flyer to attend the Queens of the University drag show on Saturday night at 10 p.m. Tears began to collect in Becky's eyes when she was given the flyer. She immediately pulled out her phone from her back pocket, snapped a picture of the flyer, and tweeted, "I feel at home here, #inclusion." She attached the flyer and posted it and tweeted to her followers. "Hey, Dr. Hemp, Dr. Hemp," I hear being shouted behind me as I'm hurrying to my 11 o'clock meeting. Turning around to see who was calling me, I see a tall, athletic frame African-American young man running up to me. Well, actually jogging, half-assed. Although administration has a certain allure, so when asked to be a liaison, has always had a magnetic draw. As he gets closer, I recognize that this is Kenny Kelly, a junior from a high-end suburb in Carmel, Indiana. "Hey, Doc, where you headed?" Kenny asked. "On my way to a department meeting, Kenny," I answered in a somewhat rushed voice. Then I asked Kenny, "Hey, man, where you headed?" Kenny flashed a coy smile and replied, "Man, I just left chemistry. I just had a pop quiz." "Well, how was it?" I asked. "I think I did okay." "You think?" I said, looking up him with a scowl on my face. "I know I did okay, Doc." For inviting me to be a part of this wonderful gathering. "Doc, I'm just excited," Kenny asked with a heavy tone in his voice. Sensing the change in his mood, I stopped and faced Kenny and responded, "Yes, sir." Kenny launches into a conversation that seemingly had been on his heart for some time. "Man, these white students, they are tripping. They don't get it. They look at me and think that I want an athletic scholarship. They look at me and think that they don't know every tall brother is not on an athletic scholarship. Every tall brother is not a baller. Man, I don't even like basketball like that. Man, I worked my ass, oops, I'm sorry, Doc, my bad. I worked my butt off to overcome my dyslexia in order to win a full academic scholarship. I get tired of always proving myself and defending my race to these white kids. Doc, they have no clue what it means to be black in America. I feel like black men are under siege in America. Man, I wrote a poem about it. Bang, bang, that's another brother dead. Bang, bang, that's another brother dead. Who's the shooter? The brother on the street or the cop on his beat? Bang, bang. Jerry brings the meeting to order, and the first agenda item is the status of the new chemistry building. Many of the faculty present were concerned that the new building would be in jeopardy because of the impending $52 million budget cut imposed by the state. Jerry informed that although the university will have to absorb the cuts in many areas, the new chemistry building would not be affected. And he was also informed that by advancement that they are in conversations with a long-standing alum who may retire the debt entirely in 2017. You can see the collective relief on the faces of the faculty members in attendance. Jerry then invited Dr. Ann Dobson to discuss the university's diversity effort, Inclusion Every Day. Ann Dobson, a full professor in biochemistry and the department's liaisons to the Colleges of Science Diversity Council, gave an explanation and an update of Inclusion Every Day. Dr. Dobson has been employed with the university for 30 years. During this time, she has held many administrative positions. She was the former chemistry chair department. She was acting dean of the College of Science, and she was vice provost for academic and faculty affairs. Annie's political acumen is unrivaled, and she is well admired. She is a well-admired administrator. Many thought that she would be a candidate for the university's open position for provost. Although administration has a certain allure, Annie has always had a magnetic draw to teaching. Annie believes the classroom is the incubator of solutions to the problems of society. She believes the solutions with the greatest impact are derived by having diverse perspectives, looking at the same problem from different. Who was calling me? I see a tall. So when asked to be the liaison with the College Diversity Council, Annie saw the opportunity to continue to serve the university and her students at a high level while doing that thing that she loved, teaching. The first slide in her PowerPoint demonstration or presentation reflects a diagram of concentric circles. The phrase inclusion every day is written at the core. The second outer circle represents the college departmental diversity and inclusion plan. The third outer circle represents the university's diversity and inclusion plan. And the fourth outer circle represents the university's plan for the Path Forward 2020. Annie explains that inclusion every day is an institutional core value supported by the major institutional strategic planning documents, beginning with the university's plan for Path Forward 2020. Annie offers examples of how the chemistry department continues to engage with inclusion every day. She talks about inclusive pedagogy mini-grants that are provided by the Office for Diversity and Inclusion and also the Dean's Office. Campaign caught me off guard a little bit. That said, it may have shown I volunteer to chair the committee. And she also talks about and gives examples of departmental climate surveys for faculty, staff, and students. Camden Alexander begins his walk to meet with the other University Foundation board members. Camden became nostalgic, walking the yard with his brothers of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. The Qs were known for throwing some of the hottest parties on campus. Collectively, they were among the select few of Greek organizations with a consistently strong GPA. However, Camden had less of a stellar record. He struggled to maintain a B- average for 2 consecutive semesters. Camden spent most of his time engaged in student advocacy. Mastering the concepts of his criminal justice major was not his top priority. Camden found a home in the Center for Multicultural Affairs. CMA offered a vast array of student programming, from authentic conversations on oppression to study abroad trips to Ghana, where students studied the transatlantic slave trade. Faculty engaged students in undergraduate research projects, such as studying the economic impact of health disparities on low-income citizens in the local community. Camden was a natural in CMA. His passion for social justice and his alarming smile rapidly tables up front that has particular table assignments and topics, and if you find those, although Camden entered this young lady was dressed in a black tuxedo, he would have rather been in the fresh air of the preview day. The foundation board meeting was called to order by the chair, and the first order of business was a discussion regarding the university's strategic campaign priorities. Camden cleared his throat, stood up, and stated, "Colleagues, there are many priorities we must address during this next capital campaign. And although we are embarking on an ambitious goal for the university, I lay this challenge on the table. Our words regarding our commitment to diversity and inclusion must align with our actions and funding priorities. Therefore, diversity and inclusion must be one of our major pillars of this campaign. That said, I volunteer to chair the Committee for Diversity and Inclusion, and I pledge my major gift donation to this priority." A spirited debate followed Camden's impassioned call to action. The constellation Orion can be easily seen on this warm September evening. Anticipation and excitement of this momentous occasion can be felt like the evening breeze. Frank Sinatra's "Fly Me to the Moon" echoes through the night air minutes or so as a throng of elegantly dressed alumni, donors, politicians, and university dignitaries file into the decorated ceremonial tent. "Excuse me, Dr. Hampton, can I borrow you for a moment?" asked Amy, coordinator of special events. "Sure, Amy," I replied. Amy directed me to the table where she and her staff were busy checking people in and confirming seating assignments. As Amy's responsibility for this evening are many, and chief among them is debriefing each dean, vice president, and key personnel about their table guests. Our primary responsibility tonight is to engage our table guests in conversations about the significance of their support, involvement, and philanthropy to our campaign. Dr. Hampton, I just wanted to confirm with you your table guests. You and Dr. Hampton will be joined by Mr. Camden Alexander and his wife, undergraduate students Rebecca Thompson and Kenny Lee, and Professor Jerry Brown and his brother, Tom Brown. I'm sorry to inform you that Dr. Ann Dobson can't be with you tonight, but she sends her regards. I am not much of a drinker. However, when I became a senior leader in administration, I found that dinner parties and wine and cheese receptions are all part of other duties assigned. Therefore, as a true lifelong learner, I began attending wine tastings so I could learn the differences between the red and whites, which wines are paired with red meat and poultry, or which wines are best with chocolate and fruit. So I approached my table with my wine glass in my hand, and I noticed a young lady already seated. I must admit I was a bit caught off guard because she was not in an evening gown like 99% of the women wore that evening. This young lady was dressed in a black tuxedo. Caught me off guard a little bit. It may have showed on my face. I gained my composure and introduced myself to her. She greeted me with a warm but shy smile. She shook my hand and said, "Hi, Dr. Hampton. My name is Rebecca Thompson, but please call me Becky." Soon, Becky and I were joined by our other table guests, Dr. Olivia Hampton, my wife, Kenny Kelly, Tom Brown, Professor Brown, Camden Alexander, and his wife, Kimberly. So that piece that I wrote gives you a sense. I wonder, what was the conversation like at table 3? Thank you. So that piece that I wrote gives you a sense. I hope it will give you a sense of how a narrative can be written. Oftentimes we are busy down in the weeds and we're in the trenches and we're doing the work, but we don't get a chance to look above 30,000 feet and look down to really see how the dots are connected, to see how collaboration is working, to see how the diversity and inclusion effort is connecting, to see how our students are experiencing diversity on campus, to see the relationships that are formed, to see how diversity is being woven through the institution in different places, through the capital campaign, through administration, through faculty, through student engagement. So that narrative is one thing that I would encourage you to do as you think about your narrative, as you think about your campus. How is it being weaved through the organization? And how are you weaving it through the organization with you and your colleagues? So now, I am finished with my remarks. Let us take time now to engage in table conversation. As Tia has explained, there are several tables up front that has particular table assignments and topics, and if you find those assignments and topics interesting to you, please stay at that table or join that table and engage in that particular topic. For others who do not wish to join the table topics up front, on your table there is a sheet in front of you that asks several questions. Take some time to delve into those questions or any other questions that you believe have not been answered throughout your time at the conference already, and engage in the conversation. I will come back in a couple of minutes, 15 minutes or so. 15 minutes? 20 minutes. I'll come back in 20 minutes and try to call us all back together. And then we will kind of do some reporting out. I'm interested to know your thoughts around the table and what you're thinking about as it relates to narrative. Thank you. All right. We're going to come back together. I know that I'm tearing you away from your rich conversation, but we need to come back together. We want to be respectful of your time, and we want to get you out of here so you can get a break, and we also want to hear some of your thoughts. And so we're just going to come back together and start this process. And one of the things you do, you just keep on talking, and eventually people will kind of look up at you. And so I've done this on a couple of times. So as we begin to think about narrative, and as we begin to jump into this conversation about narrative, this is what I would like for you to think about as you prepare to respond to the questions. When you come up to the microphone, I would ask you to state your name, the institution that you're from, that will allow us to get a little context from where you're coming from. And here's the key. You have the questions at the table. You have some conversations here. And so we're just going to open this up for a couple of moments just to get your reaction to everything that we talked about. Reaction to the story, to the narrative, reaction to the questions, reaction to your colleagues, conversation. What jumped out at you? Kind of keep your comments brief, if you will, but we would love to hear as it relates to what jumped out at you in this conversation. This is about you. This is about your thought transfer, your knowledge transfer, and we would love to hear that. So we have mics situated around the room, and so if you want to engage, let's engage and let's hear some thoughts about what happened.
So my name is Michael Penn, and I'm a professor at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. One of the things that we were talking about at our table was that there is, the narrative on our campuses and the narrative across the country is taking place within a larger narrative of the movement of humanity, the movement of human history. And I think that so few of these processes are animated by a vision that is not only diagnosing the many, many ills that afflict the body of humankind, but also the narrative has to include a discourse about how the body of humanity, I think that probably the most important insight of the 20th century was the insight of the oneness of humanity, the interdependence of all humankind. And to harvest that insight in the work that we're doing, I think would create a vision that I think would be especially attractive to young people. And so I think that in addition to diagnosing the maladies and describing in great detail the suffering of the people who have been excluded, bringing into the narrative a consciousness of the movement of humanity and the place that we are in history now, this sort of turning point in human history where the history of humanity as one people is beginning to be written. I think that this is an important element of the discourse.
Thank you so much. That was a profound thought, so I really appreciate that. Absolutely. Anybody else?
Good morning. My name is Kimberly Flint Hamilton. I'm a professor of sociology and anthropology and department chair at Stetson University in Central Florida. First of all, I want to thank you very much for sharing your stories.
Thank you.
That was very powerful and very moving.
Thank you.
I believe that at my institution, we could and in fact should go about doing something similar, collecting narratives from students and faculty and staff and administrators and even alums. I believe it would be a powerful exercise. However, I have a question on a very practical note. How do you go about analyzing them? What do you do with them so that you can find these themes and translate those themes into productive action that can actually transform the campus to make it more inclusive?
That's a great question. I'll tell you, I don't necessarily have the answer as to how to. You probably have to follow a traditional research model in that aspect. But let me just share with you what I did at Virginia Tech. And our colleague from American University yesterday mentioned that she did a similar type of thing. I went on a listening tour as the vice president. I went and talked to several of my dean colleagues, talked with them, and was invited into their colleges. And I spent a week in 3 separate colleges to understand the institution at that level. And the stories and the work of diversity and inclusion at the college level just bubbled up. And then I was able to take that and wrap that in a context of a narrative for that institution. And so I think one of the first things you do is to go across and listen. Ask these questions. What are you doing? How are you doing it? What are your promising practices across the institution? What are your experiences? And then I would suspect you get a research student and assistant and begin to kind of cull and frame that information for your university.
Thank you.
No problem. Someone here, and then we'll go there. Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Roy Moore, and I'm from the University of Denver. And I really liked your pitch on just acknowledging your own space through your narrative. And so at our table, we were discussing, so in terms of addressing diversity and inclusive excellence, there's been a challenge in trying to create these policies within our own university, but we're on the rise of doing that. But another problem that we have is that we don't have space just for our students of color. And when we do have these forums, it's always students of color that are always showing up to them, but we don't have students that are not of color that are not going. And what we're trying to figure out is why is it? What incentives do we need to put in place to where students that aren't of color to be able to come to these forums and events? And then also, how do we create space when there isn't space on campus?
Great question. I think the space issue is something that understanding campus context and understanding is something that needs to happen. But I think that that's a deeper conversation that your administrators have to really understand. Hey, we need to have space for people to engage and have these types of conversations. I think we also, to hit your second question, I believe that a lot of times when we focus on it, and our colleague who spoke first kind of hit on this, a lot of times we focus a lot on our underrepresented populations, our under-resourced, and sometimes the populations that have been ignored historically within the university. So we spend a lot of time focusing on them. And just for numbers' sake, let's just say we have a campus that has 30,000 students. And let's just say collectively with our African American, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, LGBT students, we have 2,000, right? When we begin to deploy all of our resources to support the 2,000, and we need to support the 2,000, but on this side, we kind of turn a blind eye or don't provide enough information and resources to engage the 28,000. Now we're setting ourselves up for disappointment because the 28,000, they are going to launch into this world. And they're going to, by sheer numbers, they will be leaders in this world. And so we need to prepare them, because that's our goal, is to prepare students for leadership and the global space. So we need to prepare them. And so within our diversity and inclusion space, we need to find the wherewithal and we need to find the innovation to continue to support the historically underrepresented and underserved, and at the same time engage the larger student body and university community in this whole notion of inclusion. And so when we begin to talk about inclusion, meaning when I define diversity, diversity for me is defined as the intersectionality of every part of who I am. So I'm just not an African American. I'm just not a man. I have many parts to me, and that's the intersectionality. Inclusion is the engagement with the intersectionality of the individual or group of individuals. And so once we begin to get to this place of inclusion, and we begin to say that our white students are just as diverse as our black students or Latino students or LGBT students, now we're beginning to move us to a place to where we can begin to see greater engagement across the institution.
Good morning. My name is Minna Mahlab. I work at Grinnell College. My question and reaction to this morning and to the entire conference so far is one of accountability and integration. So both last night's terrific speakers and the fabulous facilitators this morning have emphasized the importance of leadership in pushing an inclusion agenda through. And one of the fantastic questions at the table this morning is, how do you get individual accountability? And so my question is, when your institution or the people that you're working with in whatever context, when you lack that emphasis from the top, how do you get it to come up successfully from the bottom? I'm looking for those sorts of frameworks. And the integration part is, how do we, and it's connected, how do we make all of the people who aren't in this room understand that they have to be part of this too? So why do I have to go to a separate meeting for STEM pedagogy, which is my field, and a separate meeting for diversity? Why aren't they put together? And I think if we could have that be our baseline, if we could all, not the people in this room, you're already here, but if all of my colleagues in STEM would understand that that's our baseline, well, I'd be out of a job, but I think I'd be a happier person.
Wow, thank you so much. I think that, and again, I'm not going to be able to answer all the questions, and so I won't try, but I will offer some thoughts. I believe that in any situation, if you don't have the support at the top, it's going to be extremely challenging. However, most change happens when there's a grassroots movement. And so, absent support at the top, we still have to have action at the bottom and at the grassroots. And it essentially, that will bubble up. And this is hard work. This is very hard work, and what I'm asking you to do is if you don't have the support at the top, I'm asking you to get in the trenches and build coalitions of the willing. And I think once we have enough coalitions of the willing, and we also have to rely on good luck. Sometimes there needs to be a tsunami of situations that happens that forces change from outside the institution. And so a lot of times there's this synergy, this tsunami that happens where we're doing our work at the bottom, at the grassroots level. Something external to the university is happening. We get a good group of students who are moving into this whole advocacy space, and then we begin to see things happen. So that's just an observation that can't necessarily answer the question, but that's an observation to the question. Thank you. This will be our last question.
That's a lot of pressure. My name is Leonard Taylor. I'm coming from the University of Minnesota. I work for the leadership minor there, and I'm also a fourth-year doctoral candidate there in organizational leadership, and so my perspective is an organizational one. As I listened yesterday and as I listen today, some of the things that I hear are systemic, like we want systemic change. And then I also hear things like grassroots and from the bottom, right? And so there are all of these narratives and all of these discourses around different types of change historically, which is interesting because we're all thinking about change, but we're all thinking about it from different ways. The invitation, I guess, that I have to all of us, and this is from my perspective as like an org theory scholar or whatever, is to also interrogate how our institutions work as systems, and systems that are built from the same ideologies and hegemonies that we're seeking to disrupt from outside, that are coming in from outside of that system, or outside of these systems. Because I think part of the challenge and part of the frustration, having worked as a practitioner, is that when you don't understand that the system is built on the same ideologies, then you think that you can change the experiences that students are having. And then you can't, and then you quit, right? And so how do we just as much put energy into supplementing the experiences of students, because there are students that are in our institutions right now today that need this type of support, that have been pushed to the margins and ignored. But also, how do we put energy not into, or I shouldn't say not into, but just as much as we invest energy into students, how do we invest energy into critically interrogating and challenging the structures and systems that exist within our institution, because those are ultimately the roadblocks that we continue to run up against in creating any type of change to change the spaces that students are entering versus changing how students navigate them.
That's an awesome question. You hit it. You hit it. I think that you're absolutely right. I'm a systems thinker as well, very strategic in my thinking. And so I think that as the whole notion, I mentioned in the narrative this whole concept of inclusion every day. And inclusion every day, for me, is a notion that I'm trying to disrupt the system, the status quo. And so if we can begin to focus on aspects of inclusion every day, at a department chair meeting, at the president's council meeting, at an advancement meeting, we're beginning to not ask the question about diversity, but we're asking the question about inclusion. What are we doing? How are we dedicating our resources? If the CFO is thinking about inclusion every day, as he or she are moving the money throughout the organization. And that's a very, very provocative, innovative, and scary thought to put on the table for institutions of higher education, and any institution for that matter. But I think that's the type of thinking that we need to have, is to think about the system. As you recall the narrative, you began to see how diversity was beginning to move throughout the system. You began to see faculty and tenure, promotion and tenure dossiers. You begin to see advancement engaged. You begin to see the chief diversity officer engaged. You begin to see students engaged in a So I think that you have to structure and think about, how do we disrupt the system? Not only do we deploy resources to people, but we disrupt the system so that we can get to another place of growth. And I think that was our last.
I just had one statement.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, but I'm a fellow at the National Science Foundation, and all the conversations I'm hearing here just made me want to make sure everyone in this room was aware of the Includes solicitation that just came out, which is a collective impact approach to diversity and inclusion, a networked approach to it, a collaborative approach. So I would just encourage everybody to look that up because it sounds like there's some support for a lot of the collaborative efforts that the folks in this room are really engaged and curious about continuing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you
It's
all.
called Includes. It's an acronym, but it's spelled Includes.
Includes. I will hand it back over to Tia. Thank you so much.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Lewis and welcoming him for the thoughts and your ideas. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you. Thank you, Will.